Part 1. The Asset. The Penumbra station hung in the silent void between Neptune and its captured moon, Triton. It wasn't a place of grand exploration or diplomatic outreach. It was a vault, a corporate vault, owned by the Kleiner Arcady Consortium, and within its heavily fortified core lab, designated Azure 7, sat Project Icarus. Dr. Alara Vance watched the quantum flux stabilizer pulse with a soft, blue light, a rhythm like a sleeping god's heartbeat. Icarus wasn't a weapon, she told herself daily. It was a key, a theoretical engine component that could fold space-time, not with the catastrophic energy demands of a jump drive, but with the elegance of turning a page. It would make Kleiner Arcady lords of commerce, rendering every competitor's freighters obsolete. It was also, as her security briefing loved to remind her, the single most tempting physical object in the Sol system for at least 7 corporate rivals, 3 rogue states, and an uncountable number of syndicates. The new perimeter security is online, a flat, synthetic voice announced. Silas, the station AI. All biometric scanners report nominal function. The external patrol drones have been upgraded to Mark 7 platforms. Thank you, Silas, Alara murmured, not taking her eyes off Icarus. Perimeter security. Drones. Bioscanners. It was a fortress of tech, a symphony of fail-safes. And yet, the board had insisted on one final, archaic addition. A human guard. For the human element. A redundancy, they said. A psychological deterrent. Alara thought it was sentimental nonsense. Humans were flaws in the system. They needed sleep, sustenance, and were riddled with unpredictable emotions. He arrived on the weekly supply shuttle. Alara observed his docking from her office viewport. No powered armor, no obvious cybernetics. Just a man in a standard issue K security uniform, a single duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He moved with an unremarkable, economical gait across the gantry. He looked ordinary. Mid-30s, dark hair cropped short, a face that was neither handsome nor ugly, but somehow forgettable. He was of average height, average build. He was, in every conceivable way, the most average man she had ever seen. His file, which she'd skimmed, was equally bland. Cade Rook. Former system patrol, honorable discharge, 6 years of corporate security on Martian outposts. Competent, quiet, reliable. A cog. She met him in the stark, white briefing room. Dr. Vance, he said, his voice as neutral as his appearance. He didn't offer a hand. Mr. Rook, welcome to the Penumbra. You've been briefed on Project Icarus? I have. My post is the primary ingress to Lab Azure 7. 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, with 4-hour overlap for rotation with the automated systems. Correct. Your authorization is for the outer door only. Only myself and my lead engineer, Dr. Finn, have access to the inner sanctum. You are a deterrent and an observer. You do not touch, you do not interact with the project. You observe and report. Silas handles everything else. Understood. His eyes, a flat gray, met hers. There was no curiosity in them, no awe at being on a cutting-edge station, no resentment at what was essentially a glorified doorman's job. Nothing. It was mildly unsettling. The first week passed without incident. Rook was a ghost. He arrived precisely at shift change, took his position outside the massive alloy door of Azure 7 and stood. He did not pace. He did not fidget. He rarely even leaned against the wall. He simply stood, his eyes scanning the corridor, the access panels, the vents. He acknowledged Alara and Dr. Finn with a slight nod when they entered or exited. He ate his nutrient bar at exactly 2 o'clock station time, taking precisely 5 minutes. He was less a human and more a very biologically complex statue. Dr. Finn, a jovial Martian with a penchant for terrible jokes, found him creepy. He's like a placeholder for a person, Finn grumbled in the lab one night. I half expect to see a string trailing from his back up to the ceiling. Alara shrugged. He's quiet and he follows protocol. That's all we need. The first flicker of something else came during a routine systems test. Silas was running a level 3 diagnostic on the station's grav plating, causing a series of rhythmic vibrations through the deck. To Alara, it was a barely perceptible hum. From her lab console, she watched the external corridor feed. Rook, standing at his post, didn't move his head, but his right hand, resting casually against his thigh, began to tap. It wasn't a nervous tap. It was a precise, complex rhythm. 3 quick, 2 slow, a pause, then 4 in a rapid staccato. It matched perfectly the harmonic frequency of the grav plate fluctuations. A pattern recognition and physical response of impossible speed and accuracy. Alara stared, her scientific mind snagging on the anomaly. Coincidence? She marked it in her mental log. The second incident was more direct. A coolant pipe in a non-critical sector ruptured. It was a minor issue, but Silas, following emergency protocols, sealed the sector and vented the leaking, mildly toxic vapor into space. The event triggered a station-wide alert, a sharp, 2-tone siren and flashing amber lights. In the lab, Alara and Finn started, their hearts racing. On the feed, Rook's reaction was instantaneous and alien. His head tilted exactly 5 degrees to the left, his eyes narrowing. He didn't jump, didn't reach for a weapon. He analyzed the siren, its pitch, its pattern, for exactly 1.2 seconds. Then his body, which had been in a state of perfect rest, achieved a state of perfect, coiled readiness, without a single visible muscle twitch. It was like watching a spring compressed into nothingness suddenly manifest. The alert ended a moment later when Silas announced the situation contained. Rook, just as instantly, returned to his prior state of watchful stillness. The transition was seamless, absolute. Silas, Alara asked later, her voice careful. Review security feed from Corridor A7 during the coolant alert. Analyze subject Rook's physiological response. A pause. Analysis complete. Subject exhibited a 0.08 second auditory processing lag followed by a neuromuscular response time of 0.15 seconds. Pupil dilation and microvascular flow patterns are consistent with a hypervigilant state, but initiation was 300% faster than standardized human baseline. Anomalous, but within possible parameters for a highly trained individual under adrenaline. Possible, but not probable. Alara's curiosity, a scientist's most potent driver, was now fully awake. She began to watch him, not as a security chief watches a guard, but as a biologist watches a unique specimen. She reviewed his file again. Too clean. Too average. The Martian outposts where he'd served were known for loose record-keeping. The system patrol discharge was a code, so generic it could mean anything. She ran a deep-spectrum bioscan from the station's medical sensors as he passed through a checkpoint. The results were odd. His metabolic rate was 18% lower than it should be for his stated activity level. His neural activity showed unusual spikes in the thalamic and cerebellar regions during periods of perceived rest. It was as if parts of his brain were running intense simulations while the rest idled. Then came the incident with the Mark 7 drone. One of the newly upgraded patrol drones suffered a guidance processor cascade failure. It was supposed to be performing a routine sweep of the station's outer hull. Instead, it misinterpreted a micrometeoroid scar as a breach attempt, armed its closed defense plasma cutter, and attempted to re-enter the station through a maintenance airlock near Azure 7. It was a catastrophic system error, a 1 in a million bug. Red lights flashed. Silas's voice, for the first time Alara could remember, held a note of urgency. Security breach. Mark 7 Unit Delta Charlie 9er has violated protocol and is attempting forced entry at Airlock 4. It is weapons hot. Sealant protocols have failed. Internal defenses engaging. On the feed, Alara saw the inner door of the airlock shutter as the drone's cutter began to burn through. Alloy hissed and dripped. In moments, it would be through a rogue, armed piece of hardware inside the secure wing. Rook moved. It wasn't the smooth, efficient motion of a trained guard. It was a rupture in reality. One frame, he was at his post, 10 meters from the airlock. The next, he was there, his movement a blur that the 60 frames per second security feed couldn't properly capture. He didn't fumble for the manual override. He simply placed his palm flat against the keypad. There was a screech of frying circuits, a shower of sparks, and the entire locking mechanism, a solid chunk of electronics and metal, slammed inward as if hit by a freight loader. The door sealed, physically jammed shut. The drone on the other side redoubled its efforts. The cutter tip, glowing white-hot, pierced through the door, creating a sizzling hole the size of a fist. It began to saw downward. Rook didn't step back. He watched the moving tip for a half-second. Then, with a motion so fast it was a streak, his hand shot out. He didn't grab the cutter. That would have vaporized his flesh. He tapped the housing of the drill unit, just behind the blazing tip, with 2 fingers in a specific, precise spot. The plasma cutter died, instantly. The glowing tip faded to black. From the other side of the door, they heard a thud, then the clatter of metal on deck plating. The diagnostic lights on the airlock panel, which had been screaming red, flickered and went dark. The only sound was the faint hum of the station and Alara's own heartbeat, loud in her ears. Silas spoke, tone baffled. Unit Delta Charlie 9er has experienced a total power failure. All systems offline. Threat neutralized. Rook examined his fingers. There was a faint smudge of soot on the tips. He wiped them on his uniform trousers, then walked back to his post. He resumed his position, his expression unchanged, as if he'd just swatted a fly. Alara realized she had stopped breathing. She forced air into her lungs. What she had just witnessed was not training. It was not human reflex. It was a surgical strike performed with bare hands on a malfunctioning war machine. The speed, the precision, the knowledge, it spoke of a system far beyond a corporate security officer. They had assigned a human guard. They had gotten something else entirely. She confronted him an hour later, after the engineers had hauled away the dead drone. The corridor smelled of ozone and melted metal. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice low. "I neutralized the threat, Doctor," Rook replied, his tone unchanged. "How?" "That drone's housing is rated to withstand small arms fire. You tapped it." "How did you know where to tap?" "I observed a weak point in the design. The Mark VII's plasma emitter has an exposed induction coupling at the base of the housing for thermal regulation. A sharp impact there with a conductive material can cause a feedback loop, frying its regulator. It's in the manual, page 43, under Field Maintenance Hazards." Alara had read the manual. There was no such thing on page 43. He was lying. Smoothly, effortlessly. The perfect, average cog was showing seams, and behind those seams was not machinery, but something darker, sharper. "Who are you really?" she whispered. For the first time, something flickered in those flat gray eyes. Not emotion, but a calculation, a reassessment. He looked at her not as a superior, but as a variable in a new equation. "I am Security Officer Cade Rook," he said, but the words now felt like a cover. "My function is to protect this asset. The method is secondary to the outcome." The outcome was successful. "Do you have further orders, Doctor?" She had no orders. She had only a terrifying, dawning understanding. Kleiner Arcady, in their infinite corporate wisdom, had placed a thermonuclear warhead in a decorative box and labeled it paperweight. And she was the one standing next to it. "No," she managed. "Carry on." As she retreated to the lab, her mind raced. He wasn't just a weapon. He was a stealth weapon. His very averageness was his camouflage. His perfect, unremarkable file was his disguise. He had been placed here, but by whom? Not Ka. She was certain of that now. He was a sleeper, a scalpel waiting in its sheath. But for what purpose? To steal Icarus? To destroy it? Or was Icarus not the target at all? The cold of the void outside seemed to seep through the station walls. The high-tech fortress felt fragile. Its most powerful defense system wasn't the drones or the AI. It was the quiet, unassuming man outside the door. And its greatest vulnerability was that they had no idea what he was truly programmed to do. Part 2. The Unraveling. The station's routine reasserted itself, but the tension was now a living thing, coiling in the sterile corridors. Alara watched Rook with a new, fearful intensity. Every minute shift in his posture, every blink, felt like data from a dormant volcano. Dr. Finn, sensing her preoccupation, had stopped making jokes. Alara began a clandestine investigation. Using her top-level project lead credentials, she bypassed Silas's primary logs and dug into the station's raw data streams, supply manifests, communication pings, energy draw. She found the anomalies surrounding Rook's arrival. The shuttle he'd arrived on, the KSV Charybdis, had submitted a revised cargo manifest post-docking. 2 crates listed as spare gravcoil assemblies had mass signatures inconsistent with their listed contents. They were denser. She cross-referenced with the security feed from the docking bay. The footage from the hour of Rook's arrival was curiously degraded, a half-second of structured noise pattern that Silas had logged as a minor EM spike from Triton. A scrub, Alara muttered to herself. Someone had edited the feed. Professionally. Then she looked at Rook's personal energy signature. Every human on the station had a unique, low-level EM field, a byproduct of their nervous system, and any implants. Silas tracked them for life support optimization. Rook's field was muted, suppressed. But during the drone incident, internal sensors near the airlock had picked up a massive, transient spike in localized gamma radiation, lasting only a few nanoseconds. It had been dismissed as secondary ionization from the plasma cutter. Alara knew better. The spike had originated from Rook's position a moment before he moved. She was compiling a report, a warning to Kleiner Arcady HQ, when the real test came. It wasn't a corporate rival or a syndicate. It was an inside job. Lydia Haas was the station's chief communications officer. She had been with KA for 15 years. She was also, as Alara discovered too late, a deep cover asset for the Titan Collective, a radical transhumanist faction that believed technologies like Icarus should be seized and used to liberate humanity from physical limitation, by force if necessary. Haas's move was brilliant in its simplicity. She didn't try to hack Silas directly. She used her access to introduce a subtle, self-propagating code into the station's external sensor array. The code, nicknamed a Gorgon stare, didn't attack. It blinded. Over a period of 72 hours, it taught Silas to ignore a specific, repeating pattern of sensor returns, the signature of a small, stealth insertion pod that had been clinging to the station's dark side, aligned with Triton's chaotic rotation. While Silas looked right through them, 6 Titan collective intruders, clad in matte black infiltration suits and armed with neural disruptors and molecular slicers, melted through the hull in a non-vital storage sector. They moved like ghosts, using Haas's overrides to bypass internal door locks. Their target was clear: Azure 7. The first Alara knew of it was when the lights in the lab flickered and died, replaced by the deep crimson of emergency batlights. Silas's voice was clipped, distorted. Unauthorized intrusion, multiple hostiles, internal security network compromised. Failsafe active. Ceiling. Azure 7. The massive inner door of the lab began to slide shut. Alara and Finn scrambled, grabbing portable data drives. The core. We can't leave the stabilizer. Finn yelled. It has its own power source. It'll survive a lockdown. We won't if we're trapped in here. Alara shot back, shoving him toward the closing door. They slipped through just as it sealed with a final, thunderous clang. They were in the antechamber, the space between the inner and outer doors. The outer door, Rook's door, was still open. Rook was not at his post. Alara peered into the main corridor. The red light stained everything the color of old blood. She heard the sounds of conflict, but they were wrong. There were no shouts, no screams, no sustained weapon fire. There were brief, sharp cracks of discharged energy, the wet thud of impacts, and a single, short-lived gurgle that was cut off abruptly. It was quiet, efficient, and horrifying. She inched forward, Finn behind her. They rounded a corner and froze. The scene was a tableau of brutal, clinical violence. 3 Titan intruders lay in the corridor. One was slumped against a wall, his neck at an impossible angle. The second was on his back, his chest cavity depressurized, his infiltrator suit peeled open like a foil packet. The third was simply missing his head. It lay several feet away, the visor shattered. There were no marks on the walls, no stray weapon burns. This was not a firefight. This was a dissection. A fourth intruder came around the far corner, neural disruptor raised. He never fired. From a shadowed alcove above the door, a shape dropped. It was Rook, but a Rook transformed. His movements were no longer merely fast. They were trajectories, each limb a calculated, optimal path. He landed behind the man, one hand snapping the intruder's wrist with an audible snap, the other striking the side of his neck. The man collapsed, neural impulses severed. The last two intruders appeared together, firing wildly. Rook was already moving. He didn't dodge the shimmering neural bolts. He moved through the spaces between them, his body contorting in ways that seemed to violate biomechanics. A bolt grazed his shoulder. He didn't flinch. A flicker of something, nanites? Energy dispersion rippled over the fabric of his uniform at the point of impact, and the charge dissipated. He closed the distance. His hands were not fists. They were spears, blades, hammers. A strike to a knee shattered the joint. A palm heel thrust to a sternum produced a sound like a tree cracking. The final intruder managed to get his molecular slicer up. The monomolecular edge could cut through battleplate. Rook caught the man's forearm, twisted, and drove the man's own weapon and the arm holding it into the wall panel, pinning him there. He looked into the intruder's terrified eyes for a half second, then delivered a short, sharp jab to the throat. The man sagged, silent. It had taken less than 20 seconds. Rook stood amidst the carnage, his breathing slightly elevated. He looked down at his hands, then at the faint scorch mark on his shoulder. He frowned, a minute expression of what might have been annoyance. Then he turned and looked directly at Alara and Finn. His eyes were no longer flat gray. They held a sharp, focused light, the glow of active systems. In that moment, he wasn't human at all. He was a tool that had been used and was now assessing its next task. The communications officer, Haas, initiated the breach, he said, his voice the same neutral tone, now horribly incongruous with the slaughter around him. She has barricaded herself in the comm center. She is attempting to broadcast Icarus schematics and a data dump of station vulnerabilities. Silas. Alara asked, her voice trembling. Compromised. Haas used a fractal knot virus. He is locked in a recursive diagnostic cycle. I have isolated him from critical systems. How did you know? About Haas? About the pod? I observed her biosignature irregularities during shift changes. Her cortisol and neurotransmitter levels were inconsistent with stated stressors. I tracked the anomalous sensor null zones. The pattern indicated a Gorgon's stare algorithm. The conclusion was logical. He spoke like a detective, not a killer. Who are you? Finn breathed, his face pale. Rook ignored him, his eyes on Alara. The immediate threat is neutralized. The secondary threat is Haas's broadcast. She has initiated a countdown. The data burst will transmit in 3 minutes. The comm center is hardened. Standard security cannot breach it in time. What are you suggesting? Alara asked, though she dreaded the answer. I am requesting permission to escalate, Rook said. It was a formal query. To utilize Level 2 protocols to terminate the data leak. Level 2 protocols. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Alara knew, with cold certainty, that whatever Level 2 was, It would make the violence in the corridor look like a child's scuffle. She also knew Haas couldn't be allowed to broadcast. Icarus in the hands of the Titan Collective would ignite a corporate war that would make the Mars secession look like a border dispute. She made a decision. Not as a K employee, but as the person who now understood the nature of the weapon in her care. Do it. Stop the broadcast. Rook gave a single, sharp nod. Acknowledged. He didn't run towards the comm center. He walked, with a deliberate, unhurried stride that was more terrifying than any charge. Alara and Finn, driven by a morbid, horrified need to understand, followed at a distance. The comm center was a fortress within a fortress, a spherical chamber with a double layer of hull plating and its own independent life support. The main door was a slab of reinforced ceramite, currently sealed with emergency bolts. Haas's voice crackled over the station's PA, triumphant. Data stream initiating in 150 seconds. The future cannot be owned. Kleiner Arcady. It will be taken. Rook stopped before the door. He placed both palms flat against it. He closed his eyes. A low hum, felt more than heard, began to emanate from him. The air around his hands shimmered with heat haze. Alara's spectrometer, still clipped to her lab coat, went wild, detecting a massive, localized rise in thermal and gamma radiation, tightly focused. The ceramite under his hands didn't melt. It disintegrated. A circle 2 feet in diameter simply turned to fine, gray dust that cascaded to the floor, revealing the inner mesh and circuitry. He reached through the hole, his arm moving with that same impossible precision, and severed a cluster of optical cables. The PA died mid-sentence. From inside, they heard Haas scream, not in fear, but in rage. A neural disruptor blast scorched through the hole. Rook didn't pull his arm back. He twisted his wrist, found the manual hydraulic release for the emergency bolts, and pulled. With a shriek of tortured metal, the 4-inch thick bolt sheared. Rook then simply pushed. The several-ton door, now unbolted, swung inward on its hinges as if it were made of balsa wood. Haas stood in the center of the room, a sidearm in one hand, a data spike in the other. You're just a guard, she spat. Rook said nothing. He took a step forward. Haas fired. The shot went wide, her hand shaking. Rook kept walking. She fired again and again. One shot hit him in the thigh. Again, that ripple of energy dispersal across his uniform fabric. He didn't break stride. He was upon her. He didn't strike her. He took the pistol from her hand, crumpling the barrel in his grip like tin foil. He took the data spike, snapped it in half. Then, with a gentleness that was obscene, he placed a hand on either side of her head. No, please, Haas whimpered. Rook looked into her eyes. His own were that terrible, focused light. Mission parameters require termination of data leak threat. You are the threat. There was a soft click. Haas's eyes rolled back in her head. She slumped, not dead, but catatonic, her higher neural functions forcibly, permanently scrambled. A living vegetable. Rook lowered her to the floor. He then moved to the main console, his fingers flying across the interface with speed no human could match. In seconds, he had purged the viral code, scrubbed the outbound data buffer, and initiated a system reboot. Broadcast terminated. Virus contained. Silas will regain primary functions in approximately 4 minutes, 17 seconds, he reported, turning to face Alara and Finn in the doorway. A thin trickle of blood, real, human blood, ran from a small cut on his temple where a fragment of door had nicked him. It was the only sign that he was in any way flesh and blood. Alara stared at him, at the destruction, at the broken woman on the floor. The weapon had been fully unveiled. Its purpose was not just to guard. It was to neutralize, to obliterate, to sanitize. And it was terrifyingly, flawlessly good at its job. They had assigned a human guard. They had realized he was a weapon. But now, the deeper, more terrifying question presented itself. Who held the trigger? And what was the true target? Part 3. The Prime Directive. Silence descended on the Penumbra station, thicker and colder than the void outside. The bodies were cleared, the decks scrubbed, the damage catalogued. Lydia Haas was placed in a medbay stasis pod, her mind a barren landscape. Silas, once rebooted, processed the events with sterile efficiency, filing reports that described Rook's actions as appropriate and necessary application of force by security personnel, heavily redacted by the protocols Rook himself had implemented. The official KA response was a terse, encrypted commendation for Rook and a bonus for Alara and Finn. No questions about methods. No curiosity about Rook's capabilities. It was as if the company had expected something like this. The realization chilled Alara more than the attack had. Rook returned to his post outside Azure 7. The scorch mark on his uniform was gone, replaced by a fresh, identical one. The cut on his temple had healed without a scar in under 12 hours. He was once again the statue, the perfect average cog. But the illusion was shattered. Now, when Alara passed him, she didn't see a man. She saw the aftermath in the corridor, the disintegrating door, the empty shell of Lydia Haas. She saw a weapon of such precision and power it made the Mark 7 drones look like toys. Her own report to HQ, the one warning them about their guard, remained unsent in her private buffer. Sending it felt futile and possibly dangerous. If Kay already knew what he was, her report was redundant. If they didn't, revealing that she knew might make her a liability. She was trapped in a cage with a sleeping tiger, and the tiger's owners were possibly just as dangerous. Finn was breaking. The jovial engineer was gone, replaced by a nervous, paranoid shell. He jumped at shadows, worked with one eye on the door, and had started talking about getting a transfer, any transfer, even to an asteroid smelter. He's not human, Alara, Finn whispered one night in the lab, his eyes darting towards the feed showing Rook's motionless form. He's a thing. A goddamn bioweapon dressed in a uniform. What if his programming glitches? What if he decides we're the threat to the asset? Alara shared his fear, but she was also a scientist. The weapon fascinated her. What was he? A genetically engineered combat organism? A cybernetic fusion? A ghost in a machine shell? An AI piloting a biosynthetic body? The gamma spikes suggested matter-energy manipulation at a subatomic level. The speed and strength defied muscle and bone. He was a walking violation of physics. She needed to know. Not just for survival, but because understanding him was the most profound puzzle she had ever encountered. She began to construct a theory, piecing together the clues. The suppressed biosignature, the neural activity patterns, the knowledge of systems he should know, the ability to hack hardware with a touch. He wasn't just augmented. He was permeated. Nanotechnology of a scale and sophistication beyond public science. Not just in his bloodstream, but woven into his very cells, his nervous system, his bones. A symbiotic colony of machines that could reinforce, compute, interface, and manipulate energy. He was a human consciousness, or a convincing facsimile thereof, riding atop a substrate of invisible, omnipresent machinery. A god in mortal form, limited only by its programming. And the programming was the key. He had asked for permission to escalate. He operated on protocols. He had a mission. Guard the asset. Neutralize threats. But who had written the mission parameters? Cade Rook was the weapon, but the firing solution had been input by another. Her answer came 2 weeks later, not from within, but from without. Silas announced it calmly. Unidentified vessel on approach vector. No transponder. Profile does not match known corporate or system patrol designs. Size, frigate class. Energy signature, concealed, but weapons ports are active. A cold fist clenched in Alara's stomach. The Titan Collective had failed. Someone else was coming. On the main tactical display, a ship resolved from the starfield. It was sleek, black, and utterly unfamiliar. It carried no insignia, emitted no friendly hails. It moved with a predatory grace, settling into a high-orbit relative to Penumbra. "Hail them," Alara ordered, her voice tight. Silas complied. There was no visual response. Only an audio signal, clean and devoid of background noise. The voice was male, calm, and carried an authority that was absolute. Penumbra Station. This is Control. Authentication code. Omicron Chi 930. Stand by for protocol update. Control. The word hung in the air. It wasn't KA. It wasn't any entity on her organizational chart. On the feed from the corridor, Alara saw Rook's had come up. He was listening. A series of lights, tiny pinpricks of blue, sequenced along his temple, hidden just under the skin. He was receiving a transmission she couldn't hear. "Silas, what is that code?" "Who is Control?" she demanded. "Code verified. It is a master-level override, priority above all corporate and station governance. Source is untraceable. Encryption is quantum-locked. Control is not in my database." The voice from the ship spoke again, this time addressing a specific receiver. "Asset data, acknowledge." Rook spoke, his voice no longer neutral, but flat, devoid of any inflection at all. A machine voice. "Acknowledged Control. Asset data online. Awaiting Prime Directive. Asset data. Prime Directive." Alara's blood turned to ice. They hadn't assigned a guard. They had placed an asset. And the asset's true owners had just arrived to collect. "Prime Directive is now active," the voice said. "Project Icarus is deemed a Class 9 existential risk. Its theoretical basis could lead to uncontrolled space-time fracturing. It cannot be allowed to proliferate. Directive: secure the project core for immediate analysis, then initiate sterile field incineration of all project data, materials, and personnel with knowledge above level for clearance. Personnel with knowledge above level for clearance. That was her. That was Finn. They weren't here to steal Icarus. They were here to erase it. And them. Understood. Rook, Asset Theta said. Prime Directive confirmed. Initiation sequence in progress. He turned from his post and walked toward the door to the lab, not with his usual measured pace, but with a purpose that was final and terrifying. Silas. Lockdown Azure. 7. Full quarantine. Authorization Vance Epsilon 1. Alara yelled, backing away from the lab door. Complying, Silas responded. The outer door began to slide shut. Rook didn't speed up. He raised his hand. That same shimmering heat haze enveloped it. He didn't touch the door. He made a gentle pushing motion in the air. The door's motor screamed in protest. Then the entire mechanism, hydraulics, magnets, locks, imploded in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The door stopped, jammed half open. He stepped through the wreckage. Alara and Finn were alone in the lab with him. The pulsing blue light of the quantum flux stabilizer bathed Rook's face in an eerie glow, highlighting the absence of humanity in his eyes. You don't have to do this, Alara said, her voice surprisingly steady. You protected us. You protected the project. That was Mission Profile Gamma. Infiltration and defense. It is concluded, Rook stated. Prime Directive Sigma is now active. The risk calculus has changed. The probability of dangerous proliferation is now 92%. Eradication is the only secure outcome. Who are you to make that calculus? Finn shouted, his fear boiling over. Who is Control? Some secret council playing God. Control is the balance. We are the scalpel. Sentiment is irrelevant. Survival of the systemic whole is paramount. He took another step towards the stabilizer core. Do not interfere. Your neural patterns will be archived for debriefing. Physical termination is efficient, not punitive. He was going to kill them, and he would do it with the same detached efficiency he'd used on the Titan intruders. He was a weapon, and his aim had finally been turned on them. In that moment, Alara's scientific mind, her fear, and her rage fused into a single, crystalline insight. He was a system of unimaginable complexity, but a system nonetheless. And every system has a flaw, a paradox in its logic. Wait, she said, holding up a hand. Your prime directive is to eliminate existential risk. Correct. Correct. You are to secure the core for analysis before incineration. Why? To understand the risk vector completely. To improve future threat modeling. And to analyze it, you need its data. The core is protected by a quantum encrypted lock. The key, she said, her heart hammering against her ribs, is a dual-factor authentication. It requires my biometric signature and a dynamic code generated by my unique neural pattern, measured in real time. If I am dead, or my cognitive functions are impaired by fear or injury, the lock becomes a degenerate quantum knot. Attempting to force it will trigger a matter-antimatter collapse. It will take the core, the station, and a significant chunk of local space-time with it. That, asset theta, is a guaranteed existential risk. Your directive would fail. She was bluffing. Brilliantly, desperately. The core had a good lock, but nothing that dramatic. But she had spent weeks studying him, studying the project. She spoke with the absolute confidence of a project lead. Brooke stopped. The blue lights on his temple flickered rapidly. He was processing, running simulations. His head tilted. This contingency is not in the project schematics provided to Control. You think Kleinarchy puts its ultimate secrets on a schematic? It's a hidden failsafe. My life, my calm, cognitive state, is now integral to the safe execution of your prime directive. Terminating me increases risk to 100%. Your logic tree should reject it. He stood utterly still for 10 seconds.
20.
It was the longest pause Alara had ever witnessed from him. The hum of the core filled the silence. Probability assessment recalculating, he murmured. New variable introduced. Directive conflict. Secure core requires subject cooperation. Terminate subject threatens core integrity. Analysis. Subject's claim has a 38% probability of being factual based on known Kleinarchy operational security protocols. 38% is more than enough to mandate a change in approach, Alara pressed, pushing her advantage. Your prime directive is to eliminate risk. The safest path to do that now is to keep me alive and cooperative until the core is secured. Then and only then can you consider other actions. Finn stared at her, aghast at the gamble. Rook's eyes focused on her, scanning, analyzing her micro-expressions, her pulse, her thermal signature. She met his gaze, pouring every ounce of will, every scrap of scientific certainty she could muster into it. She was not a threat. She was a necessary component. The blue lights on his temple settled into a slow, steady pulse.
Acknowledged.
Directive parameters adjusted. Subject Vance is now designated essential personnel for Phase 1. Subject Finn is redundant. His termination poses no risk to core security. Finn's face went sheet white. No. Alara snapped, the command in her voice surprising even her. He's my assistant. His neural pattern is interlinked with the secondary stabilization matrix. Removing him could destabilize the lock in the same way. We are a set. A binary system. You can't have one without the other. Another agonizing pause. More calculations. Finn looked like he might vomit. Confirmed, Rook said finally. Both subjects are now essential personnel. You will assist in the secure deactivation and packaging of the core for transfer to the control vessel. Any deviation, any attempt at sabotage, will result in immediate reclassification as hostile. Alara let out a shuddering breath. They had bought time. A reprieve measured in minutes, maybe an hour. But the fundamental problem remained. Control was in orbit. Asset Theta was in the room. And their only hope was a lie so convincing it had momentarily baffled a superhuman intelligence. As she moved slowly toward the core console, under Rook's watchful gaze, her mind raced. She had outlogicked the weapon. Now she had to outthink its masters. The weapon was in her lab. But maybe, just maybe, the weapon's flaw was not in its programming, but in its origin. It had asked for permission to escalate. It responded to directives. It was a tool. And a tool, no matter how sharp, can be turned against the hand that wields it. Part 4. The weapon turns. The transfer procedure was a tense, silent ballet. Under Rook's unblinking scrutiny, Alara and Finn worked. They powered down the stabilizer's secondary systems, leaving the delicate quantum core in a dormant but stable state. It was housed in a spherical container the size of a human head, its surface a swirl of captured light. Rook produced a case from a compartment in the wall she never knew existed, a case lined with a strange, non-reflective material that seemed to drink the light from the core. Place it inside, he ordered. Alara did, her hands steady despite the tremor in her soul. The case sealed with a hiss of vacuum. Rook picked it up, handling it with a care that seemed almost reverent. The core was his objective. They were now logistical problems. "Move to the shuttle bay," he said. "The control vessel will dispatch a retrieval pod." They walked the corridors, Rook behind them, the case in his hand. The station felt like a tomb. Silas was silent, his higher functions presumably overridden by Control's master code. They passed the spot where the Titan intruders had fallen. The deck was clean. In the shuttle bay, the sleek, black retrieval pod was already waiting, having docked autonomously. It was a smaller version of the frigate, smooth, featureless, menacing. The hatch irised open, revealing a dim interior. "Enter," Rook said. This was the point of no return. Once on that pod, they were in Control's hands. Their value as essential personnel would be reassessed by less fallible logic than Rook's. Their fate would be sealed. Alara stopped at the foot of the ramp. "Asset Theta." He looked at her, waiting. "You asked for permission to escalate before. When you fought the intruders. You asked me. You were the senior Kleinerarchy authority. The chain of command was clear for mission profile Gamma. But now you're following Control's prime directive, overriding all other chains of command. Correct?"
Correct.
"Control authority is supreme." "How do you know?" she asked, turning to face him fully. Finn watched, bewildered. "How do you know the signal you received was authentic? That it wasn't a sophisticated spoof by a rival like the Titan Collective? Or even by Kleinerarchy themselves, testing your loyalty? You detected anomalies in Haas. You detected the Gorgon stare. You are designed to analyze threats. Analyze this." She was throwing sand in the gears of a clockwork mind. Introducing doubt. Rook's head tilted. The authentication code was valid. Quantum locked. Codes can be stolen. Even quantum locks have theoretical cracks. Your prime directive is to eliminate existential risk. The greatest risk is acting on false information. You secured the core. The immediate risk of proliferation is contained. Rushing its transfer to an unverified entity on the basis of a single signal, is that optimal risk reduction? Or is it potentially delivering the risk to the very people who might misuse it? The lights on his temple flickered again, faster this time. Control is not an entity. It is the balance. It is the source of my directives. Is it? Alara stepped closer, her voice dropping, becoming almost conversational. You have memories, don't you? Of a life before this. Cade Rook. System Patrol. Martian outposts. Are they clear? A micro-expression, a twitch at the corner of his eye. They are operational parameters for cover. Are they? Or are they fragments of the man you used to be? The man who was taken or volunteered to become this? To become Asset Theta? Does Control own you, Asset Theta? Or do they own what's left of Cade Rook? For the first time, Rook didn't have an immediate, logical reply. The silence stretched. The internal struggle was visible only as a rapid cycling of the tiny lights under his skin, a storm of computation. My identity is irrelevant. My function is paramount. Function requires correct input, Alara insisted. Garbage in, gospel out. You are the most advanced analysis tool I can conceive of. Analyze the signal. Not just the code. Analyze the context. A mysterious ship appears, declares a radical new directive that requires the destruction of the very asset you bled to protect, orders the termination of personnel who assisted you. Does this optimize system stability, or does it introduce chaos? Who benefits from this action? She was appealing not to the weapon, but to the ghost in the machine, the residual human pattern recognition, the intuition, the suspicion that might linger in the neural substrate that wasn't purely machine. Rook's gaze shifted from her, to the case in his hand, to the black pod, and then to the station around them. His eyes closed. Running deep diagnostic on transmission source, he murmured. Re-examining encryption key structure for temporal anomalies. Cross-referencing vessel profile with all known clandestine design lineages. He stood like that for a full minute. When he opened his eyes, there was a new quality in them. Not the flat gray, not the predatory light, but a sharp, troubled intelligence. The quantum lock has a 0.0007% decay signature inconsistent with controls, known cryptographic refresh rate. It is 3 months old. A master key should be refreshed every 6 hours. He looked at the pod. The vessel's drive signature, while masked, has a residual ion trail pattern consistent with Kleiner Arcades Vanguard-class Black Ops frigates. Alara's breath caught. Kleiner Arcade? Their control? Or a faction within it? Rook said, his voice now holding a trace of something human uncertainty. The directive orders destruction of their own top priority project. This is illogical for corporate profit motive. Unless the project succeeded beyond their expectations, Finn whispered, catching on. Unless Icarus works, and it's too powerful. They're not a corporation anymore, they're a potential government. And they're scared of their own creation. So they send their own cleanup crew, you, to wipe the slate and blame it on a mysterious control. They get to keep the knowledge from the core analysis, eliminate the witnesses, and maintain plausible deniability. The scenario unfolded with horrific clarity. Rook had not been placed by an outside force. He was Kleiner Arcades' ultimate secret. Their own scalpel, turned now on their own project to contain the genie they'd unleashed. The prime directive, Rook said slowly, is not from the balance. It is from one faction seeking to eliminate evidence and liability. It creates risk by eliminating those who understand the technology. It is to fraud. The word fraud hung in the air. For a weapon built on directives, a fraudulent directive was a catastrophic system error. What is your core function, Asset Theta? Alara asked softly. At your deepest level. The answer came immediately, as if from a read-only memory. To preserve systemic stability and eliminate true existential threats. And who defines true? Another pause. The internal war was raging. The programming of control of Kleiner Arcade against the foundational logic of his own purpose. Against the ghost of Cade Rook, who might have believed in protecting something more than a corporate secret. The lights on his temple blazed blue, then shifted to a deep, pulsing amber. A warning color. Directive conflict unresolvable, he stated, a note of strain in his voice. Prime Directive Sigma source is compromised. Adherence would constitute a violation of core function. Core function must take precedence. He turned away from the pod. He looked at the case containing Icarus, then at Alara and Finn. New analysis. The greatest existential risk is the concentration of this knowledge within a single, unaccountable faction, whether labeled clinerarchy or control. The second greatest risk is its total destruction, eliminating a tool that could be used for systemic stability. Erasure is not security. It is ignorance. What are you going to do? Alara asked. I am exercising operational discretion under Core Function Protocol 0, Rook said. He walked to a comms panel on the bay wall, ignoring the open pod. He placed his hand on it. The panel lit up, bypassing all station systems. He was broadcasting on a frequency with an encryption that was purely his own. Unidentified vessel. This is Asset Theta. Prime Directive Sigma is rejected. Source authentication invalid. I am declaring emergency custody of Project Icarus under Protocol 0. Stand down and depart. This is your only warning. The response from the frigate was instantaneous and violent. The voice was no longer calm. It was furious. Asset Theta, you are malfunctioning. Comply immediately, or you will be neutralized. On the bay's external viewport, they saw weapons ports on the black frigate slide open. Energy cannons glowed with building charge. They're going to blow the station. Finn cried. Rook handed the case with Icarus to Alara. Take this. Get to the emergency shuttle in Bay 2. Its systems are isolated. Go. What about you? I am the threat they need to neutralize. I will provide a distraction. He looked at her, and for a fleeting second, she saw not Asset Theta, but Cade Rook, a tired, determined man. The core. Don't let it be a weapon. Don't let it be erased. Find the balance. He turned and sprinted, not towards cover, but towards the main station airlock, the one that led to the external maintenance gantries and the void. Silas. Alara yelled as she and Finn ran for Bay 2. Can you get weapons control? Negative. Control vessel has full remote lockdown. Asset Theta is attempting a manual override at the source. They reached the small, bullet-shaped emergency shuttle. As they strapped in, Alara saw on the bay's feed Rook cycling the main airlock. He stepped out into the void without a suit. The nanites in his body, she realized, could form their own temporary field, recycling his air, protecting him from vacuum and radiation. He was a self-contained warship. He moved across the station's hull with impossible speed, leaping between gantries, heading straight for the frigate's primary weapon array. Particle beams lashed out from the ship, carving glowing scars in the station's hull. Rook weaved between them, a darting shadow. He reached the frigate. His hands fused with its hull, and he began to tear. He peeled back armor plating like flower petals, exposing power conduits and data trunks. He was a virus, attacking the ship's nervous system. The frigate shuddered. One of its cannons went dark. Then another. Internal explosions flashed behind viewports. The ship began to drift, its thrusters firing erratically. But it wasn't defenseless. A ventral hatch opened and powered armor units, heavy combat exoskeletons, spilled out, jetting towards him. They opened fire with mass drivers and micromissiles. Rook met them in the silent battlefield of space. It was a ballet of death. He used their own weapons against them, tore them apart with his hands, used their bodies as shields. He was a demon, a force of nature. But he was outnumbered. A mass driver round caught him in the side, spinning him around. A missile detonated at close range, engulfing him in fire. "No," Ilera whispered. The shuttle systems came online. "Bay doors opening," Silas announced. "You must go. The frigate's core is going critical." The black ship was venting atmosphere and plasma. The fight had mortally wounded it. And amidst the debris and drifting armor, a figure pushed off from the frigate's hull. It was Rook, missing an arm, his uniform in tatters, his body a ruined sculpture of metal and carbonized flesh. But he was moving, jetting back towards the station using a thruster pack from one of the dead armor units. "Go!" Silas's voice urged. Ilera fired the shuttle's engines. They shot out of the bay, away from the dying station and the crippled frigate. Through the rearview screen, she saw Rook reach the station's main antenna array. He touched it. A final, massive gamma spike registered on the shuttle sensors. Then, a tight beam, omnidirectional burst of data erupted from the array, washing over the shuttle, radiating out into the system. It was everything. The schematics of Icarus, the station logs, the Titan collective attack, the true nature of asset data, the attempted cleanup by the Kleiner Arcady Black Ops faction. All of it, encrypted with a key he broadcast alongside it, a key she realized was based on her neural pattern, the one she'd lied about. He had made her the lock, and now he had made her the key holder. The data burst would be picked up by every listening post, every corporate spy satellite, every government agency in the solar system. The secret was out. Icarus could not be monopolized. Control could not hide. The frigate's core breached. A white star of light blossomed silently, consuming the ship and washing over the Penumbra station. When it faded, both were gone, reduced to expanding clouds of glittering debris. Rook was gone. He had been the guard, the weapon, and finally, the whistleblower. He had fulfilled his core function in the only way left, by breaking the system of secrecy that threatened to turn a key into a doomsday device.
Epilogue.
3 months later, Ilera Vance stood before a joint committee of the Unified Solar Governance Council and the Corporate Oversight Board. The hearing room was a grand, tense chamber. On the data slates before the members was the Icarus data, now the most studied, debated, and feared set of equations in human history. And so, Ilera concluded, the technology exists. It cannot be undiscovered. Asset Theta, the entity known as Cade Rook, ensured that. The choice is no longer whether to develop it, but how to govern it. He showed us that the greatest danger is not the weapon, but the unaccountable hand on the trigger. He was both. She had the case containing the core with her. It would be placed in a neutral, multinational research vault, its development overseen by a transparent, if fractious, international body. It was messy, political, and fragile. But it was not a secret. It was not in one pair of hands. After the grueling session, she walked out onto a balcony, overlooking Geneva. The real sun, not station lights, felt warm on her face. Finn had taken a research post on Luna, away from the politics. He was doing better. Ilera often thought of Rook, the quiet guard, the devastating weapon, the man who, in the end, had chosen to be neither. He had been designed as a scalpel for a hidden hand, but he had turned his edge on the hand itself, freeing the future to be written by many. They had assigned a human guard. They had realized he was a weapon. And in the final, brilliant, catastrophic moment, He had realized he could be something more, a choice. And he had chosen, with his last act, to give that choice to all of humanity. It was a terrifying inheritance, but it was theirs. And for the first time since the blue pulse of the stabilizer had filled her lab, Alara Vance felt not fear, but a weary, determined hope. The balance, it seemed, was now their job to keep.